Good evening, everybody. Today we are going to discuss Thomas Hardy, his biography. So let us begin. Thomas Hardy was born on June 2nd, 1840 and died on January 11, 1928. Thomas Hardy was an English novelist and a poet. Hardy was a novelist of Victorian tradition, a Victorian realist in the tradition of George Eliot. He was influenced both in his novels and in his poetry by Romanticism, including the poetry of William Wordsworth. Thomas Hardy was highly critical of much in Victorian society, especially in the declining status of rural people in Britain, such as those from the native southwest England. While Hardy wrote poetry throughout his life and regarded himself primarily as a poet, his first collection of poems was not published until 1898. Initially, Thomas Hardy gained fame as an author of novels. His novels are Far from the Madding Crowd, 1874, The Mayor of Casterbridge, 1886, Tess of the D'Urbervilles, 1891, and Jude the Obscure, 1895. During his lifetime, Hardy's poetry was acclaimed by younger poets, particularly the Georgians, who viewed him, means Thomas Hardy, as a mentor. After Thomas Hardy's death, his poems were lauded by Ezra Pound, W. H. Auden, and Philip Larkin. Many of Hardy's novels concern tragic characters struggling against their passions and social circumstances, and they are often set in the semi fictional region of Wessex, initially based on the medieval Anglo Saxon kingdom. Hardy's Wessex eventually came to include the English counties of Dorset, Wiltshire, Somerset, Devon, Hampshire, and much of Berkshire in southwest and south central England. Two of his novels, Tess of the D'Urbervilles and Far from Marine Crowd, these two novels were listed in the top 50 on the BBC survey of the Big Read. It is a survey. As already told, Thomas Hardy was born on 2nd June 1840 in Higher Bockhampton, then Upper Bockhampton, in a hamlet, means a small village, in the parish of Stinsford in the east of Dorchester in Dorset, England, where his father Thomas worked as a stonemason and local builder. Thomas Hardy's parents had married at Melbury, Osmond on 22nd December 1839. His mother, Jemima, 1813 to 1904, was well read and she educated Thomas until he went to his first school at Bockhampton at the age of 8. For several years, Hardy attended Mr. Last's Academy for Young Gentlemen in Dorchester, where he learned Latin and demonstrated academic potential. Now that because Hardy's family lacked the means for a university education, Hardy's formal education ended at the age of 16 when he became apprenticed to James Hicks, a local architect. Hardy worked on the design of the new church at nearby Ethelhampton, situated just opposite Ethelhampton House, where he painted the watercolor of the Tudor gatehouse while visiting his father. And his father at the time was repairing the masonry of the dovecote. Hardy moved to London in 1862, where he enrolled as a student at King's College London. He won prizes from the Royal Institute of British Architects and the Architectural Association. Hardy joined Arthur Bloomfield's practice as assistant architect in April 1862 and worked with Bloomfield on Christchurch, East Sea in Richmond, London, where the tower collapsed in 1863, and All Saints Parish Church in Windsor, Berkshire in 1862 to 64. A reredos, possibly designed by Hardy, was discovered behind panelling at All Saints in August 2016. In the mid 1860s, Hardy was in charge of the excavation of part of the graveyard of St. Pancras Old Church before its destruction when the Midland Railway was extended to a new terminus at St. Pancras. Hardy never felt at home in London because he was acutely conscious of class divisions and his social inferiority. During his stay in London, he became interested in social reforms and the works of John Stuart Mill or J.S. Mill. He was introduced by his Dorset friend Horace Mole to the works of Charles Fourier and Auguste Comte. Mill's essay on liberty was one of Hardy's cures for despair, and in 1924 Hardy declared that my pages show harmony of view with Mill, means John Stuart Mill. Hardy was also attracted to Matthew Arnold's and Leslie Stephen's ideal of urban liberal freethinker. After 5 years concerned about his health, he returned to Dorset, settling in Weymouth, and decided to dedicate himself to writing. So, friends, that is all about Thomas Hardy's life, his biography. Next, in the forthcoming lecture, we will discuss his drama, The Dynasts, and all his novels, poetic works, poems, and short story collections. So keep studying and stay with us for further lectures. Till then, have a good day. Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to be through the Thomas Hardy's short stories and short story collections, when they appeared and in which magazine or collection did they appear. So let us begin with the short stories of Thomas Hardy. First one is How I Built Myself a House, 1865. Destiny and a Blue Cloak, 1874. Third is The Thieves Who Could Not Stop Sieging, 1877. The Duchess of Hamptonshire, 1878. It was collected in a group of noble dames. It is a collection. The Distracted Preacher, 1879, collected in Wessex Tales. It is also a collection. Fellow-Townsmen, 1880, collected in Wessex Tales. The Honourable Laura, 1881, it was collected in a group of noble dames. What the Shepherd Saw, 1881, collected in A Changed Man and Other Stories. A Tradition of 1804, appeared in 1882, collected in Life's Little Ironies. The Three Strangers, 1883, collected in Wessex Tales. The Romantic Adventures of a Milkmaid, 1883, collected in A Changed Man and Other Stories. 12th is Interlopers at the Nap, 1884, collected in Wessex Tales. A Mere Interlude, 1885, collected in A Changed Man and Other Stories. 14. A Tryst at an Ancient Earthwork, 1885, collected in A Changed Man and Other Stories. 15th is Alicia's Diary, 1887, collected in A Changed Man and Other Stories. 16 is 16th is The Waiting Supper, 1887-88, collected in A Changed Man and Other Stories. 17th is The Withered Arm, 1888, collected in Wessex Tales. 18th is A Tragedy of Two Ambitions, 1888, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 19th is The First Countess of Wessex, 1889, collected in A Group of Noble Dames. 20th is Anna, Lady Baxby, 1890, collected in A Group of Noble Dames. 21st is The Lady Icenway, 1890, collected in A Group of Noble Dames. 22nd is Lady Mottisfont, 1890, collected in A Group of Noble Dames. 23rd is The Lady Penelope, 1890, collected in A Group of Noble Dames. 24th is The Marchioness of Stonehenge, 1890, collected in A Group of Noble Dames. 25th, Squire Patrick's Lady, 1890, collected in A Group of Noble Dames. 26th, Barbara of the House of Grebe, 1890, collected in A Group of Noble Dames. 27th, The Melancholy Hussar of the German Legion, 1890, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 28th, Absent Mindedness in a Paris Choir, 1891, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 29th is The Winters and the Palmlays, 1891, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 30, For Conscience Sake, 1891, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 31st, Incident in the Life of Mr. George Crookhill, 1891, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 32, on 32 number is The Doctor's Legend, 1891. 33 is Andre Satchel and the Parson and Clerk, 1891, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 34th is The History of the Hardcounts, 1891, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 35th is Nettie Sargent's Copyhold, 1891, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 36th is On the Western Circuit, 1891, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 37th is A Few Crusted Characters, Introduction, 1891, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 38th is The Superstitious Man's Story, 1891, collected in the Life's Little Ironies. 39, Tony Kite's The Ark Deceiver, 1891, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 40th is To Please His Wife, 1891, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 41, The Sun's Veto, 1891, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 42nd, Old Andre's Experience as a Magician, 1891, collected in the Life's Little Ironies. 43rd is Our Exploits at West Poley, 1892-93. 44th is Master John Horsley Knight, 1893, collected in A Changed Man and Other Stories. 45th, The Fiddler of the Reels, 1893, collected in Life's Little Ironies. 46, An Imaginative Woman, 1894, collected in Wessex Tales, 1896 edition. 47th is The Spectre of the Real, 1894. 48th is A Committee Man of the Terror, 1896, collected in A Changed Man and Other Stories. 49th is The Duke's Reappearance, 1896, collected in A Changed Man and Other Stories. 50th is The Grave by the Handpost, 1897, collected in A Changed Man and Other Stories. 51, A Changed Man, 1900, collected in A Changed Man and Other Stories. 52nd, Enter the Dragoon, 1900, collected in A Changed Man and Other Stories. 53rd, Jimmy Blue, the Horse Dealer, 1911. 54th, Old Mrs. Chundle, 1929. And 55th is The Unconquerable, 1992. So friends, it is a collection of short stories by Thomas Hardy. He wrote several short stories, and these short stories were individual as well as in collected editions. So friends, that is all about Hardy's short stories. We will meet in the next lecture. Good morning everyone. Today we are going to study Thomas Hardy's poetry collection. Thomas Hardy was a novelist, a short story writer, non-fiction writer, and the writer of poetry as well. Throughout his life, Thomas Hardy considered himself a poet. So let us begin with his poetry collections. Wessex Poems and Other Verses, 1898. Poems of the Past and the Present, 1901. Times, Laughing Stock and Other Verses, 1909. Satires of Circumstance, 1914. Moments of Vision, 1917. Collected Poems, 1919. Late Lyrics and Earlier with Many Other Verses, 1922. Human Souls, Far Fantasies, Songs and Trifles, 1925. Winter Words in Various Moods and Meters, 1928. The Complete Poems, 1976. Selected Poems, Hardy Poems, Thomas Hardy, Selected Poetry and Non-Fictional Prose, Selected Poems, and the last is Thomas Hardy, the Complete Poems. So friends, this is the poetry collection of Thomas Hardy. We will meet in the next lecture with another aspect of Thomas Hardy's career as a poet, novelist, and author. Good evening, everyone. Today we are reading Thomas Hardy and his miscellaneous works. So let us begin. Thomas Hardy also produced minor tales. One story, The Spectre of the Real, 1894, was written in collaboration with Florence Henniker. An additional short story collection beyond the ones mentioned earlier is A Changed Man and Other Tales that appeared in 1913. Thomas Hardy's works have been collected as the 24-volume Wessex edition 1912-13 and the 37 volumes of Mellstock edition 1919-1920. His largely self-written biography appears under his second wife's name in 2 volumes from 1928 to 1930. First volume being The Early Life of Thomas Hardy, 1840-91, and The Later Years of Thomas Hardy, 1892-1928. Now published in a critical 1-volume edition as The Life and Works of Thomas Hardy, that is edited by Michael Milgate, 1984. So friends, these are the miscellaneous works by Thomas Hardy. So that is all about his miscellaneous works. We will meet in the next lecture. Good evening everyone. Today we are studying Thomas Hardy's romances and fantasies, and that include novels, stories, and romances. So the first one being A Pair of Blue Eyes. It is a novel, appeared in 1873. The Trumpet Major, 1880. The Two on a Tower, a romance, 1882. A Group of Noble Dames. It is a collection of short stories that appeared in 1891. The Bell Beloved. It is a sketch of temperament, or its subtitle being A Sketch of a Temperament, 1897. It was first published as a serial from 1892. Novels of Ingenuity, Desperate Remedies, a novel, 1871. The Hand of Ethelberta, it is a comedy in chapters that appeared 1876. A Laodicean, a story of 2 day, 1881. So friends, this is a short video on Thomas Hardy's romances and fantasies. So that is all for this lecture. Thank you. Good morning everyone. Today we are going to study Thomas Hardy's poetry. Nowadays we are running a series of Thomas Hardy's life and his works. So it is about his poetry. In 1898, Hardy published his first volume of poetry, Wessex Poems. It is a collection of poems written over 30 years. Means to say, Hardy spent his life's 30 years writing these poetry and ultimately published in 1898. While some suggest that Hardy gave up writing novels following the harsh criticism of Jude the Obscure in 1896, the poet C.H. Sisson calls this hypothesis superficial and absurd. In the 20th century, Hardy published only poetry. It means Hardy published his novels, prose works before entering into 20th century, and after entering into 20th century he wrote poetry only. Thomas Hardy published Poems of the Past and the Present in 1901, which contains The Darkling Thrush. This is a poem that we often see in the courses, academic courses in our schools. So it is Darkling Thrush, originally titled The Century's End. It is one of the best known poems about the turn of the century. Thomas Hardy wrote in a great variety of poetic forms, including lyrics, ballads, satire, dramatic monologues, and dialogues. And with these, he wrote a 3-volume epic closed drama, The Dynasts, about which we have prepared a lecture that is already uploaded. So, it was an epic drama, The Dynasts, which was completed in 1904 to 1908, and though in some ways a very traditional poet because he was influenced by folk song and ballads, he was never conventional and persistently experimental with different, often invented stanza forms and meters. And Hardy made use of long-hewn rhythms and colloquial diction. Hardy wrote a number of significant war poems that relate to both the Boers War and World War I, including the poem about the wars is Drummer Hodge, In Time of the Breaking of Nations, and The Man He Killed. His work had a profound influence on other war poets such as Rupert Brooke, Siegfried Sassoon. These are war poets. Hardy in these poems often used the viewpoint of ordinary soldier and their colloquial speech. A theme in the Wessex poems is the long shadow that the Napoleonic Wars cast over the 19th century, as seen, for example, in the Sergeant's Song and the Leipzig. The Napoleonic War is the subject of the Dynasts, the epic drama, the closed drama, or verse drama, or it is only one drama, major drama of Thomas Hardy, the Dynasts. Some of the Hardy's more famous poems are from poems 1912 to 1913. It is a collection of poems which came under the name of poems 1912 and 13, which later became parts of the satire of circumstances. It was included in that collection, Satire of Circumstance, 1914, written following the death of his wife Emma in 1912. They had been estranged for 20 years, and these lyric poems express deeply felt regret and remorse. Poems like After a Journey, The Vice, and others from this collection are by general Constant regarded as the peak of his poetic achievement. In 2007 biography on Hardy, Claire Tomalin argues that Hardy became the truly great English poet after the death of his first wife Emma. Beginning with these elegies, which she describes as among the finest and strangest celebrations of the dead in English poetry. Many of Hardy's poems deal with themes of disappointment in love and life and the perversity of fate. But the best of them present these themes with a carefully controlled elegiac feeling. Irony is an important element in a number of Hardy's poems, including The Man He Killed and Are You Digging on My Grave? A few of Hardy's poems, such as The Blinded Bird, a melancholy polemic against the sport of weekend jetting, reflects his firm stance against animal cruelty, exhibited in his anti-vivisectionist views and his membership in the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. A number of notable English composers, including Gerald Finzi, Benjamin Britten, Ralph Vaughan Williams, and Gustav Holst, set poems by Hardy to music. Means these are the composers who composed music on the poems of Thomas Hardy. Holst also wrote the orchestral tone poem Acton Heath, a homage to Thomas Hardy in 1927. Although Hardy's poems were initially not as well received as his novels had been, Hardy is now recognized as one of the great poets of 20th century, and his works had a profound influence on later writers, which include Robert Frost, W. H. Auden, Dylan Thomas, and Philip Larkin. Philip Larkin included 27 poems by Hardy compared with only 9 by T.S. Eliot in his edition of the Oxford Book of 20th Century English Verse in 1973. There were fewer poems by W.B. Yeats, poet critic Donald Davies. Thomas Hardy and English poetry considers Hardy's contribution to ongoing poetic tradition at length and in creative depth. Davies' friend Tom Thomgan also wrote on Hardy and acknowledged his stature and example. So friends, this is all about Thomas Hardy as a poet and his poetry. Mainly he wrote poetry in 20th century, and before that he wrote novels and prose works. So friends, we will meet in the next lecture. Good morning everybody. Today's lecture is about the novels of Thomas Hardy. It includes a bit discussion about his novels. Before this, we had a list of Hardy's novels. Today we are going to discuss one by one his novels in short. So, with the beginning of this lecture, Hardy's first novel, The Poor Man and the Lady, that was finished by 1867, failed to find a publisher. Means his first novel didn't find any publisher. He then sold it to his mentor and friend, the Victorian poet and the novelist George Meredith. Meredith felt that The Poor Man and the Lady would be too politically controversial and might damage Hardy's ability to publish in the future. So Hardy followed his advice and he did not try further to publish it. Means his first novel, The Poor Man and the Lady, was never published. Hardy subsequently destroyed the manuscript of The Poor Man and the Lady, but he used some of the ideas in his later works. In his recollections in the life and work, Hardy described the book as socialistic, not to say revolutionary, yet not argumentatively so. After he abandoned his first novel, The Poor Man and the Lady, Hardy wrote two new ones that he hoped would have some more commercial appeal. These were Desperate Remedies 1871 and Under the Greenwood Tree 1872. Both of these novels were published anonymously. It was while working on the latter, means the Under the Greenwood Tree, that he met Emma Gifford, who would become his wife. In 1873, A Pair of Blue Eyes, a novel drawing on Hardy's courtship of Emma, was published under his own name. A plot device popularized by Charles Dickens, the term cliffhanger is considered to have originated with the serialized version of A Pair of Blue Eyes, published in Tinsley's magazine between September 1872 and July 1873. And in this novel, A Pair of Blue Eyes, Henry Knight, which is one of the protagonists, is left literally hanging off a cliff. That is where and how the term cliffhanger originated. Elements of Hardy's fiction reflect the influence of the commercially successful sensation fiction of the 1860s, particularly the legal complications in the novels such as Desperate Remedies 1871, Far from the Madding Crowd 1874, and The Two on a Tower 1882. In the novel Far from the Madding Crowd, Hardy first introduced the idea of calling the region in the west of England where his novels are set, that is, Wessex. Wessex had been the name of an early Saxon kingdom in approximately the same part of England. The novel Far from the Madding Crowd was successful enough for Hardy to give up architectural work and pursue a literary career. After writing this novel, Far from the Madding Crowd, Thomas Hardy literally gave up his first work, that was architecture, and he pursued literary career. And over the next 25 years, Hardy produced 10 more novels. Subsequently, Hardy moved from London to Yeovil and then to Sturminster Newton, where he wrote The Return of the Native in 1878. In 1880, Hardy published his only historical novel, The Trumpet Major. This is a key point, and it is to be remembered that Hardy's only historical novel is The Trumpet Major, and it was published in 1880. A further move to Wimborne saw Hardy write Two on a Tower, published in 1882. And the novel Two on a Tower is a romance story set in the world of astronomy. Then in 1885, they moved for the last time to Maxgate, a house outside Dorchester, designed by Hardy and built by his brother. And at Maxgate, Thomas Hardy wrote The Mayor of Casterbridge 1886, The Woodlanders 1887, and The Tess of the D'Urbervilles. And The Tess of the D'Urbervilles, which attracted criticism for its sympathetic portrayal of a fallen woman, and initially it was refused publication. The subtitle of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, A Pure Woman Faithfully Presented, was intended to raise the eyebrows of the Victorian middle classes. His next novel, The Jude the Obscure, published in 1895, met with an even stronger negative response from the Victorian public because Jude the Obscure had a controversial treatment of sex, religion, and marriage. Its apparent attack on the institution of marriage, it means Jude the Obscure's apparent attack on the institution of marriage caused strain on Hardy's already difficult marriage because Emma Hardy was concerned that Jude the Obscure would be read as autobiographical. Some booksellers sold the novel in brown paper bags. Means it was at that time people considered it a kind of banned material, so they sold it in brown paper bag means in a way that they were hiding while they were selling it, and while somehow the Bishop of Wakefield is reputed to have burned his copy. In his postscript of 1912, Hardy humorously referred to this incident as a part of the career of the book. After these hostile verdicts from the press, its next misfortune was to be burned by a bishop, probably in his despair at not being able to burn me. These are the words of Hardy. Despite this, Hardy had become a celebrity by the 1900s, but some argue that he gave up writing novels because of criticism of both Tess of the D'Urbervilles and the Jude the Obscure. The well beloved first serialized in 1892 was published in 1897. So, friends, this was a discussion about Thomas Hardy's novel and some detailed study. So, we will meet in the next lecture with another aspect of another writer. Good morning, everyone. We are discussing Thomas Hardy nowadays, and in this series of Thomas Hardy, we are going to discuss his drama. So let us begin. Thomas Hardy wrote poetry, novels, and drama as well. His drama, The Dynasts, is one of the famous epic dramas or worst dramas in English history. So let us begin. The Dynasts, it is an epic drama of the war with Napoleonic, or you can say it is an epic drama of the Napoleonic Wars. It is a wars drama. This drama appeared in three parts. The first part came in 1904, the second part came in 1906, and the third part appeared in 1908. And Thomas Hardy's next drama, we can say it is an one act play. It is a one act play. The famous tragedy of the Queen of Cornwall at Tintagel of Lyonnesse that appeared in 1923. So here we will have some information about the Dynast. It is an English language closed drama in verse and prose by Thomas Hardy. Hardy himself describes the Dynasts as it is an epic drama of the war with Napoleon in three parts, 19 acts, and 130 scenes. Not counting the fore scene and the after scene, to be the exact, the total number of scenes is 131. The verse of the Dynasts, the epic drama or verse drama, is primarily iambic pentameter, occasionally iambic tetrameter, and often with rhymes. As I have already told you that three parts were published in 1904, 6, and 8. Because of the ambition and the scale of the work, Hardy acknowledged that the Dynasts was not a work that could be conventionally staged in the theatre and described the work as the longest English drama in existence. Scholars have noted that Hardy remembered war stories of the veterans of the Napoleonic Wars in his youth and used them as partial inspiration, means his source of inspiration for the dynast was not completely the stories of the veterans. Hardy took inspiration from it for writing the Dynasts many years later in his own old age. In addition, Hardy was a distant relative of Captain Thomas Hardy, who had served with Admiral Horatio Nelson at Trafalgar. In the Battle of Trafalgar, Hardy consulted a number of histories and also visited Waterloo, Belgium, as part of his research. The design of the dynasts is extremely ambitious, and because of its coverage of historical events of the same era, he received comparison to Tolstoy's War and Peace. Leo Tolstoy. Emma Clifford had written that Hardy used Tolstoy's novel as one of many sources of inspiration for the work, and in fact owned an early translation. However, it was not necessarily a primary source, as Hardy also drew on history of Europe by Archibald Allison among other inspirations. Hardy juxtaposes scenes, means places side by side the scenes of ordinary life with the scenes involving the principal historical figures of the age, and concentrating on their desire to found dynasties to preserve their power. So, friends, with this lecture, we come to see that Hardy wrote an verse drama, The Dynast, and it is his one of the best dramas. After all, he was a novelist and wrote very popular novels. So that is all about the drama written by Thomas Hardy. We will meet in the next lecture with the next series of Thomas Hardy, the Poetry Collection. Good evening, everyone. In this lecture, we will see how Thomas Hardy influenced his younger generation and his contemporary authors and poets. So let us begin. Thomas Hardy corresponded with and visited Lady Catherine Milnes Gaskell at Wenlock Abbey, and many of Lady Catherine's books are inspired by Hardy, who was very fond of her. D.H. Lawrence's study of Thomas Hardy 1914, first published in 1936, indicate the importance of Hardy for him. Even though this work is a platform for Lawrence's own developing philosophy rather than a more standard literary study, the influence of Hardy's treatment of character and Lawrence's own response to the central metaphysic behind many of Hardy's novels helped significantly in the development of The Rainbow 1915 and The Woman in Love 1920. Wood and Stone 1915 was the first novel by John Cowper Poise, who was a contemporary of Lawrence and was dedicated with a devoted admiration to the greatest poet and a novelist of our age, Thomas Hardy. Poy's later novel, Maiden Castle 1936, is set in Dorchester, which was Hardy's Casterbridge, and was intended by Poyes to be a rival to Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge. Maiden Castle is the last of Poyes' so-called Wessex novel. Wolf Solent 1929, A Glastonbury Romance 1932, Weymouth Sands 1934, which are set in Somerset and Dorset. Hardy was clearly the starting point of the character of the novelist Edward Duffield in William Somerset Maugham's novel Cakes and Ale 1930. Thomas Hardy's work was also works also feature prominently in American playwright Christopher Durang's The Marriage of Betty and Boo, 1985, in which graduate thesis analyzing Tess of D'Urbervilliers is interspersed with analysis of Matt's family neurosis. The symphonic poems My Dawn by John Ireland, 1921, and Acton Heath by Gustav Holst, 1927, evoke the landscape of Hardy's novels. Holst and his daughter Imogen Holst, Ireland, Muriel Herbert, Ivor Gurney, Gerald Finge, Robin Milford, and Benjamin Britten were among composers who set his poetry to music. His poetry means Thomas Hardy's poetry to music. They were composers. Hardy has been a significant influence on Nigel Blackwell, frontman of the post-punk British rock band Half Man, Half Biscuit, who has often incorporated phrases some obscure by or about Hardy into his song lyrics. So, friends, this lecture was based on the influence of Hardy, his works, and his themes on the contemporary and the younger poets and writers. So, this is all for today. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to discuss Thomas Hardy and his literary themes, means the themes on which he modeled his works. So let us begin. Considered a Victorian realist, Hardy examines the social constraints on the lives of those living in Victorian England and criticizes those beliefs, especially those relating to marriage, education, and religion, that limited people's lives and caused happinesses. Such unhappiness and the suffering it brings is seen by poet Philip Larkin as central of Hardy's works. Means these sufferings and unhappinesses were central themes of Hardy's works according to Philip Larkin. In the novel Two on a Tower, for example, Hardy takes a stand against these rules of society with a story of love that crosses the boundaries of class. The reader is forced to reconsider the conventions set up by society for the relationships between men and women. 19th century society had conventions which were enforced. In this novel, within St. Cleeve's idealism pits him against such contemporary social constraints. Fate or chance is another important theme. Hardy's characters often encounter crossroads in a journey, a junction that offers alternative physical destinations, but which is also symbolic of a point of opportunity and transition, further suggesting that fate is at work. Far from the madding crowd, the novel is an example of a novel in which chance has a major role, and these chances occur had Bathsheba not sent the Valentine, had Fanny not missed her wedding, for example, the story would have taken an entirely different path. Indeed, Hardy's main characters often seem to be held in the fate's overwhelming grip. So, friends, we saw in this lecture that there are two major points or themes on which Thomas Hardy based and modeled his works. First one is the suffering and the unhappiness that people face. That can be called the primary theme of Hardy's works, and second is fate and chance that overwhelms the characters of Thomas Hardy's novels. So, friends, that is all about literary themes that Thomas Hardy adapted for his works. We will meet in the next lecture with another aspect on Thomas Hardy. Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to study Thomas Hardy's poetry. Nowadays, we are running a series of Thomas Hardy's life and his works. So, it is about his poetry. In 1898, Hardy published his first volume of poetry, Wessex Poems. It is a collection of poems written over 30 years. Means to say, Hardy spent his life's 30 years writing these poetry and ultimately published in 1898. While some suggest that Hardy gave up writing novels following the harsh criticism of Jude the Obscure in 1896, the poet C.H. Sisson calls this hypothesis superficial and absurd. In the 20th century, Hardy published only poetry. It means Hardy published his novels, prose works before entering into 20th century, and after entering into 20th century he wrote poetry only. Thomas Hardy published Poems of the Past and the Present in 1901, which contains The Darkling Thrush. This is a poem that we often see in the courses, academic courses in our schools. So it is Darkling Thrush, originally titled The Century's End. It is one of the best known poems about the turn of the century. Thomas Hardy wrote in a great variety of poetic forms, including lyrics, ballads, satire, dramatic monologues, and dialogues. And with these, he wrote a three-volume epic closed drama, The Dynasts, about which we have prepared a lecture that is already uploaded. So, it was an epic drama, The Dynast, which was completed in 1904 to 1908, and though in some ways a very traditional poet because he was influenced by folk song and ballads, he was never conventional and persistently experimental with different, often invented stanza forms and meters. And Hardy made use of long hewn rhythms and colloquial diction. Hardy wrote a number of significant war poems that relate to both the Boers War and World War I, including the poem about the wars is Drummer Hodge, In Time of the Breaking of Nations, and The Man He Killed. His work had a profound influence on other war poets such as Rupert Brooke, C. Fitzgerald. These are war poets. Hardy in these poems often used the viewpoint of ordinary soldier and their colloquial speech. A theme in the Wessex poems is a long shadow that the Napoleonic Wars cast over the 19th century, as seen, for example, in the Sergeant Song and the Leipzig. The Napoleonic War is the subject of the Dynast, the epic drama, the closet drama, or worst drama, or it is only one drama, major drama of Thomas Hardy, the Dynasts. Some of the Hardy's more famous poems are from poems 1912 to 1913. It is a collection of poems which came under the name of poems 1912 and 13, which later became parts of the satire of circumstances. It was included in that collection, Satire of Circumstance, 1914, written following the death of his wife Emma in 1912. They had been estranged for 20 years, and these lyric poems express deeply felt regret and remorse. Poems like After a Journey, The Vice, and others from this collection are by general constant regarded as the peak of his poetic achievement. In 2007, biography on Hardy, Claire Tomalin argues that Hardy became the truly great English poet after the death of his first wife Emma, beginning with these elegies, which she describes as among the finest and strangest celebrations of the dead in English poetry. Many of Hardy's poems deal with themes of disappointment in love and life and the perversity of fate, but the best of them present these themes with a carefully controlled elegiac feeling. Irony is an important element in a number of Hardy's poems, including The Man He Killed and Are You Digging on My Grave? A few of Hardy's poems, such as The Blinded Bird, a melancholy polemic against the sport of weekend jetting, reflects his firm stance against animal cruelty, exhibited in his anti-vivisectionist views and his membership in the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. A number of notable English composers, including Gerald Finzi, Benjamin Britten, Ralph Vaughan Williams, and Gustav Holst, set poems by Hardy to music. Means these are the composers who composed music on the poems of Thomas Hardy. Holst also wrote the orchestral tone poem Acton Heath, a homage to Thomas Hardy in 1927. Although Hardy's poems were initially not as well received as his novels had been, Hardy is now recognized as one of the great poets of 20th century, and his works had a profound influence on later writers, which include Robert Frost, W. H. Auden, Dylan Thomas, and Philip Larkin included 27 poems by Hardy compared with only 9 by T.S. Eliot in his edition of the Oxford Book of 20th Century English Verse in 1973. There were fewer poems by W.B. Yeats, poet critic Donald Davies. Thomas Hardy and English poetry considers Hardy's contribution to ongoing poetic tradition at length and in creative depth. Davies' friend Tom Thomgon also wrote on Hardy and acknowledged his stature and example. So, friends, this is all about Thomas Hardy as a poet and his poetry. Mainly, he wrote poetry in 20th century, and before that, he wrote novels and prose works. So, friends, we will meet in the next lecture.